So good morning, everyone. My name is Longshi, and together with my co-presenter, Ben, we're going to be excited to present to you our work today on how we adapted principles in cognitive psychology in developing this learning tool for our first-year undergraduate chemistry students. So funny enough, it's actually not been that many years since I actually stepped foot into ETB, where many of you or many of your students might have taken their very first midterm. And I still remember, as Dr. Hard very nicely described, all of the anxiety, all of second-guessing myself, did I do this correctly? All because, well, I definitely crammed the night before. So you can see what kind of exam or midterm taker I was. But now, coming on the other side of the field, I guess, we've come to realize that there might exist this dichotomy between instructors and students. And what we mean by that is that instructors have found that a lot of the practice material that exists out there seems to be varying in difficulty, and as such is a mismatch for what students need. And at the same time, we've developed this test archive system for the undergraduate chemistry department that supports instructors in creating fair and equitable multiple choice question-based assessments. But that kind of support isn't available for students. But for a majority of these students, and still unchanging since I was a student myself, practice tests and questions remain the primary study aid for them. So the question becomes, how can we, I guess, support and fill this gap through the creation of a digital learning tool? Which is where I'd like to introduce to you all the idea of a computerized adaptive testing tool. And so what that is I really love analogies. So I'm going to talk to you about stairs. I like to imagine our education journey as a staircase. Everyone starts at a different step, and everyone is different height, so they're going to climb at a different speed. What adaptive testing does is that it uses statistical data that we're going to just colloquialize as an ability score and combined with item response theory to develop a custom journey. And continuing the staircase analogy, it could be that one student might climb smaller steps and one student might take 2 steps at a time. And as a result, we can really meet and identify student needs. So now I'm going to pass it on to Ben, who's going to explain how we leveraged Concerto to make that possible.
A little bit taller than Longshi. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Longshi. So as she mentioned, we used Concerto, which is an open source and free platform available online for administering tests to students for all numbers of applications. But specifically, we were interested in the computerized adaptive testing module, which is actually built into Concerto, which made it very easy to apply to our specific situation. So we made use of the test archive that we had from previous exams and tests in the chemistry first year courses, and we used a custom Python script to load those questions into Concerto. And we made them into a form, HTML and CSS, to display correctly along with all of the different graphs and figures and diagrams. And then we divided up these questions into different units, and we were able to present these units to the students so they could select a specific unit that they wanted to study. Then their ability score would be set to 0 to begin with, and that would be their starting position, where the CAT model would present them with a question of a slightly random difficulty around 0. And then if they got a question correct, their ability score would increase and they'd be presented with a slightly harder problem. Whereas if they got it incorrect, their ability score would decrease and they would be given a slightly easier problem. And the idea is that you can build on your knowledge, and if you get a question incorrect, then you may be ready for not quite that hard of a question. And you'd go down to an easier question until you build up your ability to do those easier questions. It's kind of building your knowledge base, and back to the staircase analogy, climbing the steps. So just a quick demo of what it looks like right now. We're in kind of a early stage of development, so it's very basic, but you're able to choose your unit of study, including the test one. Oh, it's not in this screenshot. But you select your unit, and then it presents you with a question. You choose your answer, and then when you proceed, it tells you if you're correct or not, and it gives you the solution as well, which was something that we heard feedback from a lot of students, that they wanted solutions. They were already using the past tests, but they didn't have a good solution, so we're presenting it to them here. And then they're able to submit this question and move along to the next question, which is determined by their ability score. And yeah, it's available now. You can give it a try if you want, even if you're not very good at chemistry. You can try it out. So our website is chemfast.ca, or you can scan this QR code to give it a try. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Olivia, and over the last 8 months, I've had the privilege of working with Dr. Katie Moyse to evaluate the impact of visual course outlines at MAC. So course outlines, they play a very critical role in setting student expectations and supporting student success. I remember Dr. Hard mentioned that sometimes students don't even care to check a course outline, so that's where this research comes in. So the research shows that there's fundamental issues with the current state of course outlines. And these can be summarized into 3 main pain points. Course outlines are text-heavy, confusing, often punitive. If you don't submit this assignment, you will fail. And this creates a problem, and it's that students often miss important information on these course outlines. But they don't necessarily have to. If we redesign the current state of course outlines, we can make course outlines that can be visual, concise, friendly. And we can actually make this happen by integrating user interface, user experience design principles. UI is user interface, UX is user experience. So what I did was I created this intervention. I created 2 new course outlines for Life Sci 3 PO3 and 2 AA3. And we did a single blind randomized control trial and through an online survey. So this is kind of the high-level survey structure. Part 1, students are asked to answer questions about any course outline at McMaster University. Like, how likely are they to refer back? Which components are they most likely to check? Evaluation scheme, assignment descriptions, and so on. And then we measured 3 main metrics: time to locate each component, how easy was each component to understand, and how long did it take them to understand the component. And towards the end, we got students to rate whether they were visually appealing or not through a 2-point Likert scale, yes or no, and through a textual thematic analysis that was used through in vivo. Part 2 is just the same thing, but here we've put in our randomized control trial, so we split the control group and the intervention groups. The controls group received the standard outline, and the intervention group received the visual outline. So here are some of the results. From part 1, just because of the time restraints, I don't have too much time to go into it, but basically what we found from the data is that students are very likely to refer back to a course outline, and they're most likely checking the course evaluation, assignment evaluation scheme. So here we're just going to delve into part 2 of the results. How likely are students to refer back? So we see there's a statistically significant difference between the control group that received the standard outline and the intervention group that received the visual outline. So the intervention group were more likely to refer back to this visual course outline than the control group that received just the standard one. Here we get into the 3 metrics using the evaluation scheme component as an example. Here we can see time to locate, so the intervention that received the visual outlines were quicker in locating each separate component of the course outline. The intervention group that received the visual outlines were more likely to understand the actual content that was being presented. And they were also quicker in understanding those components. And here we see kind of a breakdown of the statistical analysis for all the other components, like the evaluation scheme, assignment descriptions, course descriptions, learning objectives, and all of that kind of stuff. So we see the same patterns move all across each component of the course outline. Here we get into the ratings of the visual appeal. So we see the control group. Only around 63% said that it was visually appealing, whereas the people that received the visual outlines in the intervention group, 96% said that they were visually appealing. And we can see, the statistical score here, just over to the right. Here we get into the textual thematic analysis informed by Braun and Clark. I took over all the textual data and created certain themes and codes that were visual appeal, conciseness, organization format, usability, approachability, navigation, and the cohesion between documents. So here we see in the control group, just to say, there's the polarity scores and sentiment and how they felt about each component. So the people in the control group that received the standard outline, they were a little bit more split between their sentiment towards each theme or component in the course outline. So you can see, like, even for example, for the visual appeal, there's kind of more of a skew between towards the negative sentiment towards the visual appeal, whereas if you move right over to the intervention group that received the visual, there was a shift over to the right, and they had more positive sentiments. So what can we conclude from this? Based on the results of the study, visual course outlines allowed for a quicker knowledge synthesis of material, a deeper understanding, and more positive perceptions of course material. And in the future, we'd like to use eye tracking experiments to measure speed and questionnaires to more rigorously measure comprehension levels. And basically, the final message I'd just like to deliver is that other faculties at McMaster University and other universities should adopt visual course outlines to further support student learning. Thank you.
Hey there, Joe. How are you doing today? Would you mind standing up for me real quick? Because I would like to start off my talk by asking you a very personal question. Are you ready? It's okay, I'm just kidding. You can sit down. But I bet your heart picked up a little bit, didn't it? Wondering what was going on? Oh, we're collecting data. Did you feel yourself tense up a little bit too? Yeah, well, that stress reaction is very normal. It's a defense mechanism that our bodies employ to help us navigate intense or abnormal situations. In short doses, it's healthy and a valuable survival mechanism to protect you from acute hazards like a saber-toothed tiger or something. But experiencing stress over long periods of time, such as a 4-year degree program with little to no rest, has detrimental effects on physical and mental health and wellness, including poor sleep, high blood pressure, poor appetite, depression, and decreased cognitive ability. Students especially experience unique forms of stress as they navigate early adulthood and participate in the unfamiliar world of academia. So I'd like you all to think back to your time as a student. If you are a student, this should be pretty easy. Try to remember how you felt the first time you had 4 assignments and a midterm packed into a single week. Did you sleep easy that week? Did you skip any meals? Did you ever miss a deadline or a midterm and needed to email an instructor you barely know to ask for leniency? Did you perhaps fear being judged harshly for even small mistakes that you make? To use a term I learned in Dr. Imogen Ko's workshop yesterday, did you feel psychologically safe? Or did you feel on edge, stressed about any number of academic pitfalls, real and perceived? My name is Dr. Devin Burke, and through the McCall-McBain Postdoctoral Fellows Education and Leadership Program, I was given the opportunity to direct my own research in collaboration with the Physics Education Research Team led by Dr. Pat Clancy and Dr. Miranda Schmidt of the Department of Physics and Astronomy. Our goal is to develop a survey tool that can be employed at the department level to investigate these sorts of student experiences, gauge student mental health and wellness, and learn more about how specific kinds of academic experiences impact mental health so that adjustments can be made to support underserved or struggling students while maintaining quality educational standards. No two students in the same department will have the same set of academic experiences, nor will they cope with them equally. Because of the great variety found within academic pathways and personal backgrounds, we chose to include demographic and personal identity data in our survey to investigate inequities in student experiences and their impact on mental health and wellness. Here, I will focus on a few examples derived from our study. We investigated student perceptions and feelings surrounding a whole range of social interactions and their sense of belonging. Now, this by itself can be interesting, but because of the personal identity data we collected, we were able to identify an inequity in experience of people who have a disability. We found a potentially significant negative correlation between having a disability and feeling a sense of belonging or community within our department. We also asked students about perceptions of the department and its practices. One of those questions asked students if they felt that the department employed strategies to support learners, and we found a potentially significant negative correlation for male-identifying students. This suggests that male students may feel like they benefit less from department support systems. In order to gauge student mental well-being, we provided this reference scale, a mental health continuum, and we asked students to place themselves on this continuum. Academia can be rewarding, but it's not worth potentially permanent negative health impacts or psychological damage. And I like to think that we as educators would like to have academic policies that support students and keep them from falling into the bottom two of these states at the very least, if not three. We then provided students with a list of academic experiences, including classwork, lab work, testing, research, co-op, interactions with different TAs, faculty and administration, interactions with other students, and non-academic sources. We then asked them how they felt each of these experiences impacted their position on the mental health continuum. And here we found another inequity in experience amongst racialized students. We found potentially significant negative correlations for all forms of academic work, including classwork, labs, and testing, with the strongest link being observed in laboratory work. Now this is, I describe this as a pilot study because further studies with greater department support and larger sample sizes will greatly improve the utility of our results. And ultimately, I hope that a tool like this could be employed by any department and be used to inform their academic policies. Academia is and should remain a challenge. We just want to make sure it's a fair one. Thank you.
So active learning is a phenomenon that's been increasing interest with researchers and instructors, obviously. It's a very common sort of buzzword that you hear these days, but active learning is very hard to study because there's so many different practices with different levels of engagement. And while research has shown that there is a benefit to performing active learning strategies in the classroom, this benefit is generally compared to a more passive form of learning or across various studies, and these strategies can be completely different. So we wanted to investigate active learning with a little bit more control and a little bit more experimentation. That way we can start to figure out what the mechanisms behind the benefit of active learning might be. So while many research out there says that active learning is beneficial, we don't really know what's driving these effects. And that brought us to our research question here. So we started off focusing in on one very specific form of active learning. So while there's a million different strategies you can do, we focused on peer instruction. So peer instruction is a multi-part activity where you pose a question to start off with. So you tell students, okay, take a second, think about something. It could be a multiple choice question, something that involves a little bit of like a deeper understanding or application of knowledge. So they begin by just thinking on their own. We had them think for just 1 minute. They then would discuss that problem with their peers. So we put them into little rooms, breakout rooms, and they discussed what they thought the answer to that question might be, and they engaged with the materials that way. They then shared with the class what they found, what their what their learning outcome was, what they thought the correct answer was. And importantly, we then got instructors to provide feedback. So they then told them what the answer should have been and how to solve the problem. So we did this in a multi-part study. They began by reading over some of our lecture materials so that they had a basic understanding of what they were learning. They needed to sort of have this background knowledge in order to engage properly in an active learning session. So there was a reading phase that they did the day before our session. They then did a live session over Zoom because we collected this data during the pandemic, so we couldn't run an active learning study in person. But over Zoom, they got to discuss what, with our instructor, what they thought sort of the outcomes of would be. Sorry. Then on a week later, they did a delayed test. So 1 week later, they took a test of our learning materials again, so we could assess their knowledge. Importantly, before they did the first part of our study, we did tell them what version of the study they'd be doing. So they either were participating in an active learning, so that peer instruction activity in part 2, or they would be engaging with just a video lecture. So we pre-recorded a video lecture and shared that over Zoom. Jumping straight into sort of our general results, we tried to analyze this across a variety of variables, and as such, I can't go into it too much here, but you guys can ask me about it at the poster if you're interested. In part 1, we didn't see any differences between our video lecture group and our active learning group for comprehension scores. So that basically means that they were basically at the same level of learning when they started off. They didn't engage with the material anymore. They didn't spend more time reading it. So even though they knew they were going to have to participate in a video lecture or an active learning group, they were basically the same. Which is wonderful. So then they went off to our second part the next day. And in this condition, we actually found that the video lecture group performed better than the active learning group on our comprehension test, specifically for these shallow retention sort of questions. So ones where you didn't have to apply your knowledge, where you were just sort of regurgitating facts from the lecture. And so that's a little contrary to what past research has shown, which is usually suggesting this benefit to active learning. When it came to those deeper application questions, they were again at the same level. They also didn't report any differences in how they assessed their own learning. So we asked them about how well they thought they were going to do, and there were no differences there. Importantly, though, the active learning group did report that they invested more effort in our session. They had more positive and negative affect. They had more liking in our session, as well as less mind wandering and less multitasking behaviors. They also reported a higher likelihood of them participating in a similar session like that in the future. So our final test 1 week later, again, showed that the groups were actually comparable, so there was no differences between them. And so this was for both those shallow questions and those deeper sort of application questions. And what's interesting is just that it suggests that the benefit from the video lecture was sort of just that immediate retention because they got to see that material twice. So we didn't find any direct learning benefits for the active learning group, which is unusual given the literature, but like I was just saying, participants in that video lecture condition actually had more exposure to just sort of those like key terms and other sort of retention level content. But importantly, peer instruction is likely still a useful strategy since it kept students engaged and enjoying the class, and that's going to be very valuable, especially with attrition rates in online classes. Thank you.